Stop before you send that text, before you call them again, before you try one more time to explain yourself, to justify your worth, to make them see what they're losing. I need you to hear this. Because what I'm about to tell you is the one thing nobody is going to say to you right now, and it is the one thing that will actually change everything. Here is the brutal truth about human psychology that most people spend their entire lives refusing to accept. People do not value what is always available. I don't care how good you are to someone. I don't care how loyal you've been, how much you've given, how many times you've shown up. If you are always there, always accessible, always the one reaching out, you will be taken for granted every single time. This is not a flaw in the other person. This is a flaw built into human nature itself. And once you understand it, really understand it, everything changes. I've studied power and human behavior for decades, and one of the patterns I keep seeing again and again in politics, in business, in romance, in friendship, is what I call the law of absence. The person who is always present loses their power. The person who knows when to disappear creates an almost magnetic pull in the people around them. Think about it. Think about every person you've ever deeply wanted, the ones you couldn't stop thinking about. Were they the ones who were constantly available? Or were they the ones you were never quite sure about, the ones who kept you slightly off balance? This is not a game. I want to be very clear about that. What I'm describing is a deep psychological reality. When someone is always there, the human mind files them under guaranteed. And the guaranteed things in life, we stop noticing them. We stop appreciating them. It's the same reason you don't marvel every morning at having electricity in your home. It's just there. It becomes invisible. And here is the tragedy. Good, loyal, loving people become invisible to the very people they care most about. Not because they did something wrong, but because they did everything right. They never left. So what is the simple trick? It is this. You stop being available. Not out of anger, not as a punishment, not as a manipulative game where you're secretly hoping they'll notice and come crawling back. You stop being available because you redirect that energy, all of that time, all of that emotion, all of that attention you've been pouring into someone who stopped pouring it back. You redirect it entirely toward yourself. Here is what happens when you do this. First, there is silence. And the silence feels devastating at first. Your instinct will be to break it. Don't. Because while you're sitting in that silence, something is happening on the other side. The human mind cannot tolerate an open loop. When someone who was always there suddenly isn't there, the brain fixates on it. Where did they go? What are they doing? Are they okay? Did I lose something? That fixation, that sudden awareness, is the beginning of value being restored. You cannot manufacture this by talking more, by explaining more, by being more patient and understanding. You can only create it through absence. But here's the part most people miss, and this is where the real transformation happens. It's not about them coming back. It's about what happens to you while you're gone. When you stop obsessing over someone who doesn't value you, when you stop analyzing every word they said and every text they didn't send, you start to return to yourself, and you discover something that the relationship had been quietly eroding, your self-worth, your sense of who you are independent of their approval. I've seen this happen over and over. People who were completely diminished by a relationship, walking on eggshells, shrinking themselves, becoming smaller and smaller to fit into the space someone had decided they deserved. They pull back, they go quiet, and within weeks, you can see a kind of quiet power returning to them. Their posture changes. The desperation leaves their eyes. They stop explaining themselves. And ironically, that is exactly when the person who didn't value them suddenly starts to feel a very uncomfortable sensation. the fear of actual loss. You have to understand something about the human ego. Every person, no matter how confident they appear, has a deep need to feel significant, to feel that they matter, to feel that their presence has an impact. When you are always there for someone, you are feeding that need for them constantly, and they begin to feel significant not because they've earned it, but simply because you keep showing up. But the moment you stop showing up, their ego goes into a kind of panic. Suddenly they are no longer certain of their own significance, and that uncertainty is extraordinarily powerful. Now, some people will respond to this with bitterness. They'll say, "You became cold, you became distant, you changed." Let them say it. What they are really saying is, the dynamic shifted and I don't like being on the other side of it. And that's fine. That's information. That's data about who that person actually is and how they actually relate to you. Because someone who genuinely values you, who has simply gotten comfortable and needed a wake-up call, they will respond very differently. They will reach out. They will ask what's wrong. They will reflect. And that reflection is where real change becomes possible. But I want to go deeper than the relationship dynamic, because honestly, that's not even the most important part of this. The most important part of this is what it forces you to confront about yourself. Why were you accepting someone's diminished valuation of you in the first place? Why were you so afraid of the silence, so desperate to keep the connection alive, that you were willing to shrink yourself to fit what they were offering? This is the question that matters. And the answer almost always comes back to something I've written about for years: the way our early experiences wire us to seek out certain kinds of emotional validation. If you grew up in an environment where love was inconsistent, where you had to earn attention, where affection came and went unpredictably, your nervous system learned to associate that inconsistency with love. It learned to find comfort in pursuit, in trying, in proving your worth. And so as an adult, you end up in dynamics where you are always the one working harder, always the one caring more, always the one who would lose more if the relationship ended. And you call it loyalty, you call it love. But a large part of it is a pattern you didn't choose, playing out again and again. This is why the real work of reclaiming your value has nothing to do with the other person. It has to do with you understanding your own patterns clearly enough to break them. The silence, the pulling back, the going quiet is not a tactic, it is a discipline. It is you choosing, possibly for the first time, to stop outsourcing your sense of worth to another person, to stop making their opinion of you the verdict on who you are. When you do this, when you genuinely, not performatively, shift your energy inward, you begin to build something that no relationship can give you and no relationship can take away: an internal foundation, a core, and people can sense that in you. It changes how you carry yourself. It changes the quality of your attention. It changes what you're willing to accept and what you're willing to walk away from. And it changes, fundamentally, the kind of people and the kind of relationships that are drawn toward you. So here is the simple trick, and I want you to hear it not as manipulation, but as self-restoration. Go quiet. Go inward. Stop performing your value for someone who has decided not to see it. Not because you want them to chase you, though that may happen, but because you deserve to spend your energy somewhere that it grows rather than somewhere that it disappears. The people who come back will come back because they woke up, and the people who don't come back, they've given you the most valuable gift possible. They've set you free to find your own level, to find the people and the situations that recognize what you bring without you having to prove it over and over again. Remember this: your value does not decrease because someone failed to see it. And the moment you truly believe that, not just intellectually, but in your bones, You will never again beg for a seat at a table that was never really yours. You will simply build your own, and watch who comes to sit at it. When someone doesn't value you anymore, try this simple trick and watch what happens. Part 2, Robert Greene, Motivation. You tried it. You went quiet. You pulled back. And now something strange is happening. Either they came back or they didn't. And either way, you feel something you weren't expecting. Not relief, not victory, something more unsettling than that. Because here's what nobody warned you about. The moment you stop chasing someone, you come face to face with yourself. And that is the real test. Not whether they come back, but what you do with who you are when they're gone. I told you last time that absence creates value. That is true, but I want to go further today because too many people misunderstand that principle and use it like a weapon, like a calculated move in a chess game. They go quiet for 3 days, check to see if the other person reacted, and then come flooding back with the same energy, the same neediness, the same patterns that created the problem in the first place. And nothing changes. The cycle restarts. And 6 months later, they're in the exact same place, asking the exact same questions. Why doesn't this person value me? Why am I always the one who cares more? Here is the answer, and I want you to sit with this because it is uncomfortable. The reason the pattern keeps repeating is not because you haven't found the right trick yet. It's because you haven't changed the fundamental thing that is attracting this dynamic into your life. You keep meeting the same person in different bodies. The faces change, the names change, the details change, but the essential experience remains identical. And that is not bad luck. That is a signal, a very loud, very consistent signal from your own psychology, telling you that something deeper needs to be examined. Let me tell you about one of the most fascinating and painful phenomena in human psychology. Sigmund Freud called it the repetition compulsion. What it means is this: we are unconsciously driven to recreate the emotional conditions of our earliest relationships, not because we enjoyed them, but because they are familiar. Familiar to the nervous system means safe. Even when something is painful, if it is familiar pain, the body and the mind know how to navigate it. They've been here before. They have a map. But unfamiliar joy, unfamiliar stability, unfamiliar love that comes without conditions, without drama, without the constant threat of withdrawal, that feels dangerous. That feels suspicious. That feels somehow like it can't be real. So what happens? You meet someone stable, someone consistent, someone who is genuinely available and genuinely interested. And instead of relaxing into it, something inside you begins to pull away. You find reasons to doubt them. You create distance. You feel suffocated by their reliability. And then, almost like the needle of a compass returning to north, you find yourself drawn back to someone who gives you that old familiar feeling of having to work for love, of being slightly off balance, of never quite knowing where you stand. And you call it chemistry. You call it passion. But what you're actually feeling is recognition, the recognition of a wound. So the real trick, the second layer, the one that goes beneath the surface, is not about what you do with the other person. It is about becoming deeply, unflinchingly honest with yourself about the story you are telling about love. What do you believe at the cellular level that you deserve? Not what you say you believe, not what you tell your friends over dinner, what you actually believe, revealed by the patterns of who you choose and how long you stay. Because here's the thing about self-worth that nobody talks about honestly enough. It is not a feeling. It is a practice. It is a daily decision to act in accordance with the value you claim to have. And most people, most intelligent, thoughtful, capable people, have a catastrophic gap between the value they know they have intellectually and the value they demonstrate through their choices. They know they deserve better, and then they accept worse, again and again and again. And every time they do that, every time they override their own knowing, they send a message to their own nervous system. My knowing doesn't matter. My boundaries are negotiable. My worth is something other people get to decide. This brings me to the thing I want you to genuinely understand about boundaries, not as a buzzword, not as a self-help cliche, but as a fundamental mechanism of power. A boundary is not a wall you put up to keep people out. A boundary is a standard you hold for yourself about what you are and are not willing to experience. And the critical thing, the thing that makes all the difference, is that a real boundary has consequences. A boundary without consequences is just a preference. And preferences, people will cross every single time if they sense there is no cost. The person in your life who stopped valuing you, they didn't stop overnight. It happened gradually. There was a moment early on when they crossed a line. Maybe it was something small, a canceled plan that wasn't addressed, a comment that landed wrong and you let it go, a pattern of them taking and you giving that you normalized because you didn't want to seem demanding. And in each of those moments, a message was sent and received. There are no consequences here. I can take without losing. I can diminish without cost. And so they did. Not necessarily with malice, just with the unconscious logic that all humans operate by. We take up as much space as we are given. So what does real change actually look like? Not the performative kind, not the going quiet for 3 days kind. Real, lasting change in how people relate to you, and more importantly, in how you relate to yourself. It starts with a single decision that sounds simple, but is extraordinarily difficult to execute. The decision is this: I will no longer act from fear. Not from the fear of losing someone, not from the fear of being alone, not from the fear of seeming too much, too needy, too difficult. I will act from values, from clarity, from an honest assessment of what I need and what I'm willing to offer in return. When you begin operating from values instead of fear, the first thing that shifts is your communication. You stop hinting and start stating. You stop waiting for people to read your mind and start saying clearly what you mean and what you need. You stop having the same conversation in your head 20 times before you have it out loud. And here is the remarkable thing that happens when you communicate from a place of genuine security rather than anxiety. People respond differently. The same words, delivered from a different internal state, produce entirely different results. Because people are not just hearing what you say, they are feeling the energy underneath it. They are registering on a primal level whether you mean it. Now I want to talk about something that I think is the most under-discussed consequence of being in a relationship where you are not properly valued, and that is the erosion of identity. It happens so slowly that most people don't notice it until they're already deep in it. You start to organize your life around the other person's rhythms. You check your phone before you check in with yourself. You calibrate your mood to their mood. You start to lose track of what you actually want, what you actually enjoy, what you actually think, separate from what they want, what they enjoy, what they think. You become a satellite orbiting someone who doesn't even realize you're circling them. The trick, the real trick, the lasting one, is to become the planet again, to reestablish your own gravitational center. And this means doing the things that have nothing to do with any relationship, returning to the interests you dropped, pursuing the ambitions you put on hold, spending time with the friends you slowly stopped seeing, sitting alone with your thoughts long enough to hear them again. These are not coping mechanisms. They are the reconstruction of a self. And a self, a genuine, grounded, interesting, growing self, is the most attractive thing in the world. Not attractive in a calculated way, attractive because it is real, because it radiates the one quality that is impossible to fake for very long: wholeness. You were promised in the title that if you try this simple trick, you will watch what happens. So let me tell you what actually happens. And I want to be honest with you, because you deserve honesty more than you deserve comfort. Some people come back, they feel the absence, they feel the shift in your energy, and they do the reflection that you were hoping they would do. They recognize what they had, they show up differently. And if you've done the real inner work, if you've genuinely changed your relationship to your own worth and not just performed the behavior, you will be able to tell the difference between someone who has genuinely grown and someone who has simply returned because the discomfort of your absence became greater than the effort of showing up. That distinction matters enormously because one of those is a foundation and one of those is just another chapter in